Thank you, Carmen. Very, very thoughtful, provocative contributions. So I'm now going to turn to Professor John Smithin to be our last discussant, and then we'll try to use the remaining time as effectively as possible with some exchange and to draw in the audience as well. So that'll be my challenge. So John, over to you.
Yep. So new economic thinking, I realize that's the name of the overall conference, but I think it applies very much also to this session. And I would say yes, it is urgently needed. We've heard 4 papers this morning from Richard Koo, Duncan Foley, Mario Seccareccia, Alan Taylor, commentary by Carmen Reinhart and Paul Jenkins, that I think provide excellent examples of it. However, I would also say, and it's been said as well this morning, that we need to be aware of old economic thinking and not continuously be repeating the mistakes of the past. I do take Alan's point, by the way, about not learning the wrong lessons, as we will see. In any event, given the time, given the place, not necessarily the time, given the place, I cannot resist putting up 2 quotes from Keynes, both from the year of the original Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. And this deals with what Alan called the internal problem, and it's from Keynes to Hayek about Hayek's book, The Road to Serfdom. Keynes says, "We are all grateful to you for saying so well what needs to be said. Morally and philosophically, I find myself in agreement with virtually the whole of it. However, you admit that it is a question of knowing where to draw the line. You agree that the line has to be drawn somewhere. The logical extreme is not possible, but you give no guidance where to draw it. I should therefore conclude your theme differently. I should say that what we want is not no planning or even less planning. We almost certainly want more. But the planning should take place in a community in which as many people as possible, both leaders and followers, share your own moral position. We need, therefore, not a change in our economic programs, which would only lead in practice to a disillusion with your philosophy. I've highlighted that part, but even an enlargement of them. I accuse you of confusing the moral and material issues. Acts can be done safely in a community which thinks and feels rightly, which would be the way to hell for those who think and feel wrongly." So I put in the quotes and emphasis. Now, Hayek's book was an attack on socialism and collectivism and an argument that these would always lead to totalitarian government. But visit websites on the political right, big R of the blogosphere today, and we find that Keynes is demonized and Hayek is idolized. But that can't be right in the sense of correct, can it? Because Keynes agrees with Hayek philosophically and morally. But I would say Keynes is too mild when he says that a Hayekian program would merely lead to disillusion. I mean, I think Richard is referring to that in some of your discussion, because Hayek presented a theory not of capitalism, but of a barter exchange economy, essentially without money and credit. And that's what's usually meant by the term market in the academic context. But it is a system which not only has never existed, but could not possibly exist. Planning, finally. Planning is a vague term that was much in vogue in the 1940s, but it has no clear meaning and was frequently used simply as a catch-all for any type of government involvement in the economy. However, given that it's Keynes who is writing, we can be fairly certain that what he is asking for more of is what our speakers today have been discussing under the broad heading of macroeconomic management, either monetary or fiscal, and including, I would say, thinking about the overall financial framework. Now, in that context, I would say Keynes' response to Hayek is not really a good answer, so to speak. But it is the only possible answer. Okay? Everything does hinge on whether our communities, both national and international, and both leaders and followers, do indeed think and feel rightly. So let me... The second quote, this goes to what Alan was, and our other speakers were talking about, the external problem. And here I am talking about not making the mistakes of the past. This was Keynes defending the original Bretton Woods Treaty before the British House of Lords, 1944. In the future, the external value of sterling shall conform to its internal value as set by our domestic policies and not the other way round. Secondly, we intend to retain control of our domestic rate of interest and keep it as low as suits our own purposes. Thirdly, we intend to prevent inflation at home, but will not accept deflation from outside. Have those responsible for the monetary proposals been sufficiently careful to preserve these principles from interference? I hope your lordships will trust me not to have turned my back on all I have fought for. It is above all as providing an international framework for the new ideas associated with the policy of full employment that these proposals are to be welcomed. So all I have fought for is again the potential for conscious macroeconomic policy management, and monetary proposals is the original Bretton Woods system of fixed but adjustable exchange rates. What is important here is the highlighted part of the quote, because it seems to me that trust me is not the best possible policy advice, wherever, regardless of where it comes from. So did in fact Keynes protect the domestic economic interests of Great Britain at that time? I think we can answer that simply by contrasting the subsequent financial fortunes of Britain, that's the country where I was born, okay, with those of Canada, where I have spent most of my adult life and all of my career as a professional economist. I have that in quotes, by the way, in the text. I really need only to refer to the three major exchange rate crises in Britain in 1949, 1967, and 1992. The last one, of course, in the context of the short-lived European monetary system rather than Bretton Woods. Now, I was only present for one of those crises and did not know much about it at the time, but have since read much about all three, as well as the similar episode in 1931 before Bretton Woods in the days of the restored gold standard. Meanwhile, Canada was only briefly part of the Bretton Woods system for a few years in the 1960s, and the exchange rate has been floating now for the past 41 years. That's not always been popular, either with the business community or the general public. When the Canadian dollar was 62 cents, that was too low. When it was $1.10 US, that was too high. And my wife and I are both well aware of the impacts that these fluctuations have on ordinary Canadians, because during that period, we've made fairly frequent trips to the USA for family reasons. But my attitude has always been to take the rough for the smooth. The point is, though, that these exchange rate fluctuations allowed the Canadian monetary and fiscal authorities, I'm sitting next to one of them, to pursue their own course and the national economic interest as they saw it. Now, that does not mean to say that I've agreed with all, or even most, of the policies. It's rather more difficult to say this sitting next to Paul Jenkins. Policies pursued by either the Bank of Canada or the Government of Canada over that period. I was always opposed to the inflation targeting policy, for example. I would be still more opposed to a price level targeting policy, as been discussed recently. My own view, and this would actually solve quite a few of the problems that we talk about today, my own view is that the central bank should attempt to stabilize real interest rates at low but still positive levels. That's my mantra. Similarly, I was opposed to the high taxes coupled with spending cuts in the pursuit of balanced budgets in the 90s and early 21st century. And I would take exactly that same position today in terms of what is needed to recover from crisis and recession. Our panelists have already explained the logic behind those positions, so I don't need to repeat that. The point is, however, that there has been nothing to stop the Canadian authorities from pursuing these or any other policies on their own heads, be it, as the saying goes. The British pound. The British pound has been floating since 1992, and Britain did not actually join the disastrous Eurozone. I say disastrous because what it does, of course, is it places the formerly independent countries in the same precarious fiscal position as provinces in a federal state. However, at least as seen from afar, not having joined the Eurozone, and this was mentioned last night, does not seem to have prevented the British policymakers from pretending that they have done so. You know, why? Why do they do that? I think the answer is probably, you know, bad economic theory. And I would suggest that each of our panelists today, okay, has asked very similar pertinent questions, okay, either in the case of other individual national economies, for example, Japan, or on the global scale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John.